Hello and welcome to another scrapbooking process video. I'm Tracy, also known as MercyTiara, and I make scrapbooking process videos and more here on my channel. Today I'm using the Sweet Summer Kit from MercyTiara Kits and the Mixed Media add-on, and although I have no idea as I'm starting this process, I'm going to end up making one of my all-time favorite layouts that makes use of lots of ephemera and themed items. I'm starting by pulling off the promotional sticker from this comic book. This was one of the freebies that our guest Olaf got when he visited our local comic book store. He visited it multiple times, and so he ended up with several of these free comic books that they give out with a purchase. And so I have 3 of them here, and if you're a huge fan of comic books, you might cringe a little bit when I tear into and cut some of these, but he left them behind. He could only bring so many things in his luggage back to Germany, and so he did leave me these 3 comic books for me to create with, so I'm very pleased to have these pages to work from. I'm starting with this book, which has some of the color schemes that I'm looking for. I'm just kind of flipping through and thinking about which of these books have the images that I might want to draw from. At this point, I'm thinking I might want to use that comic book paper to layer behind some of my layers. I'm also thinking that this letter tissue paper might also work. I've got 2 copies of it. One is a darker copy with mostly black with white letters, and the other one is white with black letters, so it's a little bit lighter. I'm going to tear out this page because I feel like it would make a really nice layer with some of the colors that I'm going to be leaning towards. The comic book store itself has lots of yellow and orange in its signage, so that big picture of Olaf there in front of the window of the store is going to kind of dictate my colors. I thought I might want to use that border as well. That's from the cut files. And I'm just having a look here. I think that these are too frilly for the look that I'm going for, but I think that the red foam letter stickers will work really well. And I especially like the idea of combining the bold red foam letter stickers with those little tiny black circle letter stickers to make a mixed font title. So I'm very unlikely to need those simple story phrase stickers, so I'll be putting those away in just a second here, but I'm going to keep these ones out. Now at this point, I think that my layout is going to be more of a traditional layout. It turns out not being, so I'm looking at what die cuts or patterns I might want to use on this. I was thinking, if anything, I might want to use some sunflowers because they pull in that beautiful yellow color. I'm thinking I might want to use this red for my background. I think it's going to provide a lot of energy for a comic book themed layout. And then I also thought that this tealy bluey color would also work for a background. I like this paper because it brings together the blues and the reds. It's not exactly the same shade of blue, but I do really like that as well. So I thought I might go with various shades of blue and then red as well, because there's different shades of blue in the comic book paper as well, which at this point I think is going to be a layer on my page, but it is not. So I'm thinking I might want to look for 2 papers that will work really well together. And Tara, one of my Patreon tiaras, recommended that I try the black. And yeah, that looks really great, especially with the comic book that I'm using. And then I decided what I think I'll do is do panels. My original thought was that I would make this be a diagonal layout. I really love a diagonal line. It also gives lots of energy. But then I thought, hey, this is about a comic book store. Let's make my page look like a comic book page. So I cut my blue paper that I wanted. This came in the Cardstock add-on, and I cut that into these strips. First, I cut it so that it would fit from a horizontal perspective, from a vertical perspective on the page into 3 different columns. And now I'm cutting it into these panels within those columns. And I want to have a little bit of black showing through as my border. And there, this looks a lot like a comic book page to me, especially the comic book that I have out. So sometimes comic books have a white background and sometimes they have a black background. So this one is having a black background. So my problem here is that one of those photos is a little bit too big. It doesn't fit properly in the panel, but Tara suggested it could actually protrude into another panel, which is often the case in comic books. So then I remembered I have this stamp set. This is called Everyday Hero, and it is from Stampin' Up. And now that I've had a chance to show it to you, I really like the little cityscape in the bottom, and it looks very comic booky as it's supposed to. And so here she is suggesting that I could cut the comic book store, like my actual photo, into one of those kinds of scenes. And I'm thinking maybe I could take it a little bit further by also having this other cityscape someplace else on the page, or what I'm going to end up doing is an even better idea than that, but we'll come to it. I'm not going to spoil the process for you. So I'm just going to reorganize some of these panels so that they fit better with what my ideas end up evolving into. And I thought I might put the picture of Olaf up in the corner there in front of the comic book store, and then have the actual comic book store someplace else. And I'm just going to fussy cut around it as Tara suggested. I thought that was just a fantastic idea, and it's going to look really great. I love how it ends up looking. So I'm just using my cutter bee scissors here to just very carefully cut around the outside edge of this photo. And luckily it was a gray day that day, so the sky is actually white. And so the same white border that's around the squared edges of the photo kind of look like it just continues around the outside edges of the photo. Now I'm thinking I might want to use a circle punch to punch out the main part of this photo into a circle, and then mount that circle on a shape that I'm calling a kaboom shape. And you probably know what I mean when I say that. It's like the comic book kaboom, and that's what I want to put on this page. Now, this photo fits perfectly in that punch, but then I have nothing to hold. So I'm putting a little Post-it note on the back side of the photo so it doesn't leave any sticky marks on the photo itself. And that just allows me to be able to move the photo around enough to get it positioned in exactly the right place. Now I want to mount this on a kaboom, that is a kaboom shape that is made out of the red paper. So I traced my circle on the back side of that red paper, which is this chicken paper. And then I very loosely used my pencil to make some kaboom shapes in and out and in and out. And I do really like how this looks. Yay, it looks very much like I didn't follow the shapes that I drew at all, but it's good that I drew it in pencil because it allowed me to know what shapes I actually didn't want to have on this shape. Now it is a little bit off kilter there, so I am going to hold the photo in place so that I know exactly where it's going to be, so that I can just shave off a little bit of these. And there were a few too much of the little rays. I guess I'll call them rays. I was trying very hard to make sure that this did not look like a sun. So I was mindful of making those rays all different sizes and directions. And also I wanted it to have more of an oval shape than a circle shape. And I thought that that would help it not look like a sun as well. I am using my Faber-Castell Pitt pen with the brush tip here. This gives me a nice bold outline around the outside edges of my kaboom shape. There's a little slit in there where I cut prematurely, but that's okay. You can't even see it. And I'm really glad that I tried this. So my thought was that I would want to outline it also with white just to brighten it up. It felt like it was going to be too dark to have the photo on that darkish pattern paper, the red paper. So I thought, well, let's just see before, because I really like that shape and I only have this one piece of the red paper left because I've already scrapbooked with the red paper. So I thought, let's just see how it looks. And I actually did not like it. So I was so happy that I had the foresight to just try that. Now I'm thinking I might mat this photo on a pinked circle. I took out my pink circles at the very beginning because I thought that a pink circle would have the energy of a comic book, but I really like this imperfect kaboom shape instead. So I've decided to not use the pinked circle. But as I mentioned, it's still, I feel like it needs some white. So not a white outline and not a white pinked circle, but maybe I just need to make myself a second kaboom shape And so that's what I'm going to do. I grabbed myself a piece of white cardstock from my stash. The kit this month, the cardstock add-on does not have white in it, but this is from, I think it's from last month's or the month before. And I just didn't use it all up, so I had it still in my kit caddy. And I'm just going to cut this out. Ooh, I'm cutting it a little bit too zigzaggedy there. And it's also taking up too much, and it's interfering with that kaboom shape that I really like so much. So let's see how many times I can say kaboom in this video. So I did kind of trim it down a little bit. And I can't remember if this is the one that I'm going to end up keeping. It is not. So I really love how this looks outlined. But when I put it on there, it's still, I feel like it's still interfering a little bit too much. So what I decided to do instead was, it was just looking a little bit discordant from the background kaboom shape. And so what I decided to do was I will trace that kaboom shape again. And Tara's reminding us here that outlining fixes everything. So I traced the original large kaboom shape, and now I am taking my pencil and I'm trying to make a smaller kaboom shape that mimics the larger one. And so I'm basically just making little triangular shapes in the same places that they are on the larger kaboom shape. And then I'm going to just kind of freestyle it in between those rays because they're spread out. And I just need to cut out random little triangular shapes in between the rays that will mimic the rays on the larger kaboom shape. Does that make sense? Did I say that in a way that makes any kind of sense? I hope that the combination of you seeing me do it and me explaining it gives you a sense of what I did here. And I was completely winging it. I do really like this kaboom shape a little bit better than the other white one. And there are some parts of it that I really like, especially that little piece that juts out all on its own. But I don't want this shape to distract or take away from the other shape. It's supposed to be just adding a touch of white to my little embellishment or cluster, or whatever we're going to call this piece. And now I'm realizing that when I flip this over, it's got all of the pencil lines on it. And when I flip it over, it's not going to be a mirror. It's not going to mimic my larger kaboom shape anymore. Anyhow, I'm going back to the idea of the original one, but actually I really like this one a lot better. I like how it's not a perfect exact duplicate of the larger one, but it shares some of the same rays of pointiness. And so I'm going to have to erase all of my pencil lines because I can't flip this over because it's not symmetrical and it's going to no longer be mimicking the shape. And I feel like this is a really good way to match my photo on the larger red shape. So I am using my 1-point pen for this. It's a Sakura. It's like my Sakura Pigma Micron markers, which I love for journaling and outlining, but this one is a Pigma Graphic 1, and so it's from a different, it has the same barrel, but it just seems to be from a different line. So here's the shape that I'm going to mat my photo with, and I probably should have done this ahead of time, but it turns out it was okay, but I have to outline this very carefully right around the outside edge of this circle photo, which was punched. I want to just add a little bit of a border, and because I did it freehand, there are little bits that I have to just tidy up a little bit, but I do like the imperfection of that because it turns out that this page is going to be looking like a comic book page itself, and so comic book pages have, the edges look like they're hand drawn, so I think that works really well with what I have in mind here. The layout is going to change quite a bit between now and the end product, but I wanted to share the whole process with you. This page was so fun to make that I really want you to see the whole process as it came together because it took a lot of turns. I mean, this was the biggest turn from going from a classic scrapbooking page to more of this kind of like a reproduction of a comic book page. I traced the shape of the size of that circle sticker that I had pulled off of one of the promotional comic books. It has the logo of the store and just a little saying on it. And so I wanted to know how big that was so that I could make another kaboom shape here that I can mount that sticker on. I'm using the same Faber-Castell Pitt pen with a brush tip to outline this one. Outlining really does make everything better, especially when you want a nice bold edge like this. Using a bold tipped marker really helps. So now I'm going to put that sticker back on it. I took the stickiness off of it with a powder tool, so I have to re-stick it by adding some glue. I'm just using Art Glitter Designer Dries Clear Glue. And I am also going to outline that. I'm outlining it with that Graphic 1 Pigma Micron pen. Not Micron, it's just a Pigma Graphic 1. So now I have these two kaboom elements on my page that I have to spread out and find some balance. And then I also have this piece. So since those other shapes are mounted on the red pattern paper, I decided to mount this piece on the red pattern paper too. And this is going to take a couple of different turns in the road as well, but it's going to start with me just matting it like this. And I didn't cut it properly, so I'm moving it over here. I was cutting it a little bit too close to the edge, and I want to have more red showing than that. So I'm just cutting it in a different spot so that I can have another go at it. I'm leaving lots of red showing this time, and then I'll come back and cut it in if I need to. Now this is not going to stay like this, but here I am. I'm going to outline the outside edges of this because the other things are outlined, so I need to outline this too so that it all looks like it matches nicely. And it all has that uniform finishing to it. Now, the problem with that is that it only encroaches on the space above it a little bit. I wish that it encroached on that space more, but I'm going to fix that. There's a couple of ways that I'm going to fix that. In the meantime, I noticed that there were some phrases on this comic book that I thought might make a good addition to my own little comic book. So I'm cutting out the word zap, and I'm cutting it to look a little bit like a lightning bolt. And I'm thinking I should probably mat it on something, but I'm going to wait and decide what I want to use because I'm starting to really run out of that red paper. And this is a good thing that I didn't cut into it because I ended up needing that red paper for something else a little bit later. So I did find another couple of phrases here. I found this lady running who I thought would be pretty cool. And I also cut out a phrase that says boom. And I thought that the word boom was really good because our city has a town clock up on the Citadel, and they fire a cannon from it every day at noon. And you can hear the boom from around the city. And we were actually telling our guests about this, that if they hear a loud boom while they're in the city, don't be afraid. It's just the cannon being shot. So that is relevant and, relevant to our city and to their visits. So I thought that that was a good one to include on the page. And now this is just a girl who I thought looked cool running, and she's got a weapon with her. It looks like a sword, a light up sword of some sort. And it says "Voomp" underneath of it. And so I'm cutting that out because I think it has cool energy and I want to put it on my page. So that'll go down in this bottom panel. And now I'm going to cut out boom as well. Just fussy cut all the way around that. And comic book paper is pretty thin, so you have to be a little bit careful as you cut around it. So I like how that looks. I've got quite a few elements here, and I had also pulled out this panel. The reason I pulled this panel is the guy is in a library or something. There's a lot of bookshelves behind him, and I thought it kind of reminded me of the comic book store with all the shelves in it. So I decided to use that as one element for my panels as well. Now, I do have to think about my title, and what I'm thinking about doing now is moving the main photo element below the top and having that longer panel above it hold my title as well as that panel from the actual comic book of the library. So I'm going to use these block letters as I decided at the beginning to spell out my title. I was lacking a C, so I just cut off part of the G to make it into a second C there. And then I'm also lacking another O, so I'll use the zeros on the back here to get another O, and then we're good to go. I did put powder on the backs of these foam letter stickers from Simple Stories. They are surprisingly sticky, and I just need to de-stick them because you can't move them around once you put them someplace, which I don't like that about letter stickers. So now that they're de-stuck, I can scooch them around a little bit. And at this point, I thought that the title of this would be Comic Book Store. And so I was thinking, yeah, I've got enough of all these letters as well to spell out store, but I don't need to take those out quite yet. I just need to know where this is going to go. So I've got it all laid out, and I'm thinking underneath of the actual photo of the comic book store, I thought I'd put a panel of text, like in a comic book where they have a panel at the bottom of the panel that just has text in it. Now this one is a little bit see this panel, it's just a little bit too wide. It doesn't have as much black space around it as all of the other panels. And I think that it's okay if there's some imperfection here. They don't have to be evenly spaced because they wouldn't necessarily be in a comic book either. I think that sometimes they are not fully perfectly aligned. And so this is coming together pretty good. Now I have a sense of exactly how this layout is going to start to look. It's really at this point that it's starting to come together. So this bottom panel on the bottom right-hand side is 6 inches. And so I'm cutting, it's a little bit more than 6 inches. So I'm cutting a white piece here that will hold my journaling, and it will be 6 inches wide, which is very convenient because my printer prints onto 4x6 paper very easily, and I will do my journaling on that. Now, I've decided that instead of mounting this on the red, I thought that I would mat some of these little cut aparts. I would mount them onto black. So I'm doing that with this zap. I'm just going to cut this out. And I just want all the corners to be nice and sharp, so I'm cutting into each one. And I'll do the same with the boom, just using some liquid glue so that it lies nice and flat. I don't want anything curling up, and because comic book paper is so thin, it can curl up if you don't glue it all the way. So I just want to make sure that that is taken care of. And I'm cutting sharp edges instead of curvy edges as often as I can. There were a few places where I had to be a little bit curvy. And then I'll do the same with this running lady with her sword. We'll glue that down with the wet adhesive as well, and then we'll fussy cut all the way around it. So that's looking pretty great, and I love the impact that these shapes have on my comic book page here with both the outlining in black and then the matting in black helps things to really kind of pop up. Now I have this idea where I thought it looks a little bit samey with every panel having the same paper. And I had thought in the back of my mind that I might put some patterned paper on some of these panels, but I didn't want to use any of the pattern paper from the kit. I could go into my stash, but I also knew that I had the mixed media kit here, and I had pulled out some of these letter themed pieces of tissue paper from the mixed media kit. So I've decided I'm going to add white panels to 2, and then I'm going to change my mind and do 3. But I'm going to add some white panels to 2 of these panels so that it'll be matted. matted with the blue. And then I'm going to cover the white panel with the tissue paper. So it will be like I'm making my own patterned paper to go on these panels, which will be matted with the blue like that. So I like how that is looking. It's going to brighten up my page a little bit and also bring some interest into some of these panels. So I'll show you how I do this. What I ended up doing was cutting out some pieces and I cut them a little bit bigger than I need them because then I can trim them down later. That way they don't have to be perfect when I'm trying to decoupage them onto the pieces of white cardstock that I cut to size. So now I'm going to get a craft mat here, and pardon my craft mat, it hasn't been washed in ages and I allowed gesso to dry on it. Gesso will just flake off, but I just haven't gotten around to do that yet. So I have my multimedia mat, which I used in a recent layout. So I know that I have 2 bottles of it, and I know that one of them is like stirred up and one of them is separated. So I pulled out that one and I figured out which one was the one that was pre-mixed. So they're so old that they separated is all that it was. But in my last video, I mixed one of them up so that it's not separated anymore. And as you can see, I'm just using my silicone brush to paint a very thin layer of this multimedia mat on the white piece of cardstock, and then I'm basically gluing my tissue paper to it, and then I'm putting another very thin coat of that matte product to the top of it as well. Then, because the corners were not quite sealed properly, I pulled back each corner and added a little bit more multimedia matte on each of those corners. And now I'm going to clean up, and I will show this just because I love that silicone brush because it just wipes up with a baby wipe and you don't have to go to the sink. So I put that aside to dry, and then I immediately thought, hang on a second, I wish I could do that with this too. I don't have enough of the same tissue paper, but I do have this other tissue paper that's very similar, so I will use that. And I'm going to make a mistake here and mat this, like I'm going to decoupage this tissue paper to the blue paper, but what I should have done is cut a white piece. So I'm going to cut some of this out. So I did go back. I realized after I fully adhered that piece of paper onto the blue piece of paper, as you can see it off to the top there, I realized I had done that wrong. So I cut a piece of white paper and repeated the entire process on this white paper. Then I cleaned up my surface and put away my mat. And by now, the first 2 panels are dry enough. They're not fully cured, but they're dry enough to handle. So I'm going to just lay them upside down on my trimmer here. And I'm just aligning this white card so that it is exactly lined up with where my blade will go. And you can see that if you use a rotary trimmer, the trimmer, that white strip, has a little indent in it where the blade runs. So I can very easily tell where the blade is going to go. And that allows me to trim this off perfectly. This one is not dry yet, so I'll have to do something else while I'm waiting for that one. So while I wait for that one, let's just see how this is going to look as it comes together. Ooh, I really like that. Really, really like it. And then that will look like that, but it'll look better because it'll be on white instead of the blue. So while I wait for that to dry, I went back to this Stampin' Up! Stamp set. It, again, is called Everyday Hero, and I decided to use that little cityscape that it's very comic book style in its drawing, in its illustration style. And so I'm going to stamp that onto this white cardstock that I have left over. I had already used it in the journaling little piece that I cut off. I'm actually not going to journal on that piece. It's more holding the space. Oops, I dropped my stamp onto the stamped image and it ended up leaving a little bit of a mark on my grid mat, but that's okay. We will try this again on the other side. And there we go. These Stampin' Up! Stamps, they ink and stamp so beautifully. I love them. They're really great. I don't always love the style of Stampin' Up! Stamps, but I really love their quality. So whenever they have a stamp set that I like, I usually buy it just because I know it's going to be a very enjoyable experience to stamp with it. So we're just going to trim this down. Again, this is dry enough. It's not fully cured, but it's dry enough to use. And you see that there's those white edges on it. That's just because that tissue paper was only so wide, and I'm realizing I can actually use this piece that I thought I had ruined, but I can just pull the tissue paper off the back side of it so that it's not showing, and still use it as the mat here. So I don't have to cut another piece of that blue paper as I was thinking I might have to. Once I trimmed down that piece with the letters on it, it was quite a bit less obvious that there was the white edging on it, so that's good. I'm using my Faber-Castell Pitt pen here to outline, and the nice thing about this is the same brush point Pitt pen I've been using for this whole project, but the nice thing about these Pitt pens is they are filled with India ink, and that will work very well on mixed media items. So it will draw over paint, it will draw over decoupage things, and all sorts of different weird surfaces that you might have in your projects. So let's outline all of these panels now. Now, one of those panels I had cut into 2 panels, and then I decided to make it into 1. So I just used some washi tape to tape that back together again. I might have been saying something else as I did that, so I might not have narrated that part. But it's covered by the kaboom. So and we'll outline this one as well. And once the outlining is in place, boy, this page is really pulled together now. It's starting to really come together and look great. I'm really loving it. Now, these letters will go up here, and I've decided to change the title from Comic Book Store to Comic Book Adventure. So those will go like that. And now I'm actually going to pull this panel down and work on it separately. I'm going to put the letters, the small black letters, so that they overlap with that comic book panel that I'm using. And I'm going to use more of this Art Glitter Design Clears designer glue. It dries clear. And I am going to, as you can see, I anchored the beginning and the end of this title by gluing down the C and the K, and then I'll work backwards from there. I'm leaving a bit of space between these letters because I'm pretty sure I'm going to want to outline them, because as you can see, that tissue paper becomes quite a distracting background that takes away from the legibility of this. So now that that's all glued down, I'm thinking, yeah, I'm pretty sure I'm going to want to outline this. So let's just see how my gel pen works. I was pretty sure that these Jelly Roll gel pens work great on mixed media, but I just had to do a little check. So I checked it on the back, and yes, it works really well. And I'm going to stop between the words so that you can see the difference that it makes. It's subtle as you're doing it. As you're doing it, you think, is this really worth it? But then when you take a step back and really look at it, yes, it does make a difference. Look at that. The difference between comic and book is just enough to make it. And I grabbed a photo so that I could show it on Instagram or have it on hand if I ever want to show this in detail. But yes, it makes quite a difference. So this is my Jelly Roll 10 white gel pen. It's just a plain white gel pen, and it works really well. It's a little bit thicker than the main, like the standard Jelly Roll pens are 8 point, and this one is 10 point, so it's a little bit thicker. Now, I just wanted to have a sense of how wide this title would be, which is why I held up the edge there to just see. I counted out the number of letters and just spaced it out, and it looks like Adventure is going to fit. I didn't want Adventure to be too close to that whoosh that is on the panel that I'm putting these letters on. Didn't want it to look like I'm saying Comic Book Whoosh Adventure. So, but they're far enough away that it's okay. I just use my own fingernails. I know some people use tweezers for applying these kinds of little letters, but I just use my own fingers and then a pokey tool, and that is good enough for me. I find it really hard to use tweezers. They never do what I want them to do, so I find my own fingernails work better. And when you're pulling these stickers off of the backing sheet, if you did get this kit, you just want to make sure that you're bending the backing sheet and not bending the letters, because if you do bend the letters, sometimes that black piece on the puffy sticker will pop right off. If that happens, it's okay. It'll glue right back down, but I just wanted to let you know that it's better to pull back the white paper. Now you can see the idea that I had there. I have decided, because remember I stamped this image out and I wasn't sure exactly where I would use it, and I didn't want it to compete with the building that I already have a photo of on this layout. So what I've decided to do is, remember how I said I just wished that the photo of the comic book store was a little bit bigger so it protruded even more into the cell above it? So I'm going to layer this stamped image with the comic book store image that already has a couple of background buildings on it. And I'm going to have to cut it apart a little bit to creatively make it be as substantial as I want it to be. But I think that this is going to look really cool. It kind of takes my real life photo and adds this comic book element to it. It reminds me of some of those movies that have both a real life, like live action component to it, as well as a comic book component to it. And I think that that's just really fun. I cut them into 3 different pieces so that I could piece them together strategically so that it looks like these comic book version of buildings are just naturally occurring behind my photo. Because I'm running out of this red paper, I'm going to have to use some of the mat that I already used here for the bottom part, and then I will piece together. I'm just going to layer that so that it stays, and it'll make it easier for me to cut apart. And so I basically have 2 pieces of that paper layered on top of itself, and I'm going to add the outlining before I cut it. So there we go. And I just lined up the outlining with the outlining that was already there. And I'm piecing together these 2 pieces to make one red pattern paper mat for my building cluster, I guess we'll call it, my cluster of buildings. And now that is more substantial and I like it quite a lot. And plus it allows me to use that fun stamp set that I was really hoping to use. I did not use the wow on the stamp set. I really liked that too, but I didn't get a chance to use that. And now I'm going to put some foam adhesive on the back of this kabam or kaboom shape, and that will pop it up off the page where this is the element that houses the main photo. So this is the photo of the person. I want this to stand out on the page, and definitely with a comic book, we want lots of things to be popping out, and this is one of them that needs to pop. So I'm just custom cutting little bits of this foam tape to hold up all of my little rays that kind of extend out from this shape. And then I went to my computer and I just opened a Pages, which is just the word processing app that I use. And I have a template in Pages that I've just saved, and I just keep rewriting over it. So it's just a saved file. I don't know how to do templates. It's probably a thing you can do, but for my sake, I just always use the same piece. So I have one of these that's sized to 4x6, and I just had to do a little bit of Googling to figure out how to actually do that. And then I can print. I have another one that's 3x4 as well, and that way I can print for any pocket pages. And it just so happens that this panel is 6 inches, which is the same width that I already have a template for. So I will be printing these words onto a 4x6 card, and first I'm going to change them to the classic font, Comic Book Sans, of course, the font that we never want to use in design because it's a terrible font, but we actually do want to use it today because we're making a comic book layout. I wish that it wasn't so bold, but it's okay. I wish that it was the actual comic book font in the comic book is a little bit thinner than this, and I couldn't get it any thinner without knowing what I was doing, so I decided to just give up on that. But I am going to make it smaller for sure so that it will, and I also changed the margin so that it would print all the way through. So as you can see, I just resized that. I think I made the font 10 point or something like that, and printed it up on just a regular piece of photo paper. I sometimes will run a 4x6 card through and put it on that instead, but I had already had photo paper loaded into my printer, so it was easy enough to just do that. I almost rounded the corners, and I actually had to look at the comic book because I was like, do those little narration parts, do they have rounded corners or not? They don't. So I did not round those corners, and hooray. And one of my patrons, Rita, was commenting on the page. She was liking how it's coming together, and her son is a comic book fan, so she was thinking she might use some of these principles on a page of her own. I really love how this piece turned out. I'm going to take all of the pieces off of it now. Anything that's not attached, I'm going to take off so that I can, before I start putting this page together, I just want my panels to be attached to the background so that I can design from there. And I'm not being too careful about making sure that this is all lined up. In fact, there are places where I'm making it specifically not be perfectly aligned so that it can have that comic book look to it. A little bit wobbly, I guess, is the look I'm going for. And I'm just using my ATG for this, and then we'll just apply this last little bit. And like most comic books, I think that they're usually signed someplace. At least the comics in the funnies in the newspaper always have the author's little signature. So I thought I would include my signature on the side in comic book store style or comic book style. I'm going to outline my journaling piece because that will help it look like one of those panels in a comic book. And I did glue the comic book store photo down without popping it up. I just felt like it needed some stability, and I needed some pieces to not be popped. So that one is not popped up. This one is also not popped up. Again, I'm using liquid glue here to make sure that I don't get any little edges curling up on this page as it dries and cures and exists in my home, which is sometimes humid. And we'll pull off the adhesive backing for my kaboom shape. That's a lot of adhesive pieces, isn't it? But it's going to be good, and all these pieces will support my shape so that it doesn't get squished in an album or in the box where I keep it. I don't keep my photos, my layouts in albums anymore. I keep them in boxes. And more on that at some point on my channel. I'll be following up on that. And now this piece fits just perfectly in that top little panel there, and we'll just put the kaboom or the boom on that, and we'll pop up the zap. There's no real reason for zap. There's a reason for boom, but the zap and the lady running are just comic book elements that are just there for the sake of being there. They're kind of like if you have a llama on a page for no reason. They're kind of like that, but they're at least along the same lines of the theme. That zap really fills out that space nicely beside the comic book store. And this one I will also pop up. And it will fit right in that space, and it totally finishes off this page. I am so pleased with how it turned out. What do you think of it? There's just a little bit right here. Remember how I said I don't want this tissue paper to roll? I want it to look like it's the pattern paper. I mean, it's a comic book. It's supposed to be flat, right? Except for the kabooms. They need to be standing out. So this is my page. I'm really pleased with how it turned out. Before I share the photos, just a quick shout out to my Patreon supporters. These folks right here on the screen, they help make this channel happen. So big thanks to them. Patrons get early ad-free access to my process videos and also real-time unedited versions of my videos, usually in the form of a live stream, so they can kind of watch, and sometimes they even have input on my pages. Thanks to you also for watching all the way to the end. Once again, I'm Tracy, also known as MercyTiara. I share my full process, including the decision making along the way, what works and doesn't work. So be sure to check out the links at the end of this video for my complete works of thousands of scrapbooking process videos. If you're new to scrapbooking, just be sure to check out my intro to scrapbooking series called Take the Plunge. I'll link it here as well. And I hope that you enjoyed this page. Stay tuned to my channel for more process videos and more. And until next time, take care and have a really great scrappy week.